on emerging Midwest invasives. We are recording this meeting, just so you know. The first plant that we're going to be hearing about is lesser celandine. We have a presenter, Kurt Dreisilker from the Morton Arboretum, who I'll formally introduce in just a moment. But first, I just want to spend just a couple of minutes getting everybody acclimated to why we're here today and what we have coming up over the rest of this year. So this presentation series is being offered, I said, by the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. My name is Michelle Balasker. I'm the coordinator for the network. We've been around since 2003, and we're here to help coordinate invasive species education and management across agencies and organizations throughout the Midwest. And you can see from this map, that's a pretty sizable region. We've got 9 states plus the province of Ontario. And our mission is to reduce the impacts of invasive plants in the Midwest. Okay, having a little trouble here. Okay, so the reason that we're talking about lesser celandine, and this is the other list of plants that we'll be talking about this year, is because we did a survey at the end of last year, and we asked experts from across our region what they consider to be new and emerging invasive species of concern for the Midwest. We got 65 responses, all from all of our states and provinces that we represent. And this is the top 10 species that really rose to the top. These are considered either, well, we're calling them emerging invasives because they're either not in the Midwest yet, but they're knocking on our door, or they are here, but they're still in small enough pockets, not widely distributed yet, but there's a high potential for spread. So we're concerned about that.
Sorry to interrupt you here, but the slides are not advancing.
Oh, okay. Let me see. I think, let me try something. All right. I apologize. First one, if you come to the next one, I will have all the bugs worked out, I promise. Let's try this again. How are we doing now?
Yeah, looks like the next slide looks good.
Okay, so this is MIPIN's region. My apologies there. 9 states, Ontario. And this is our top 10 list now that you can see. Lesser celandine, the one we're talking about today, was named most frequently as an invasive species of concern for the Midwest. So we're going to start with that one. Also kind of works out nicely because this is an spring emergent. So it's a good time of year to be thinking about this. 50 plants altogether were named through this survey. If you want to see the full list, that is available on our website. You can also see the results from our 2020 survey, which was quite similar, and you can compare, well, we compared for you, so you can see what was reported in 2020 versus 2022, which is kind of interesting. And if you'd like to be able to share this information with others in your network, we did create a flyer highlighting these 10 plants and a little background on the survey, and this is a PDF that you can download at no charge from our website. Okay, this is my final slide, and then I turn things over to Kurt. That each of our speakers are going to address management of the invasive species that we're featuring, but I also wanted to share with you some of the resources that MIPIN has. So MIPIN has what we call a control database, mipin.org/control. 5 of these, kind of our top 10, are in that database, as well as over 45 other plants. So you can go there and do a search and get all the different management options that exist for these plants. You can also find guidance for some other plants, including lesser celandine, that we're again talking about today, that were developed by some of our partners. And for woody invasives, I highly recommend going to woodyinvasives.org. It is an excellent website, also created by MIPIN, that has treasure trove of information, but it does include information on management. So just some things to have kind of in your back pocket going forward. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to invite Kurt to go ahead and pull up his slides.
So you should be able to see that, Michelle.
I am going to, yep, that looks good. Okay, give me just another moment, please. Okay, so let me formally introduce Kurt here. We're so happy to have him with us today. So Kurt is the head of collections, horticulture, and natural resources at the Morton Arboretum, which is located in Lisle, Illinois. Since 2004, he's been planning and implementing ecological restoration throughout the Arboretum's 900 acres of natural areas. So the Arboretum, as a public garden and as a tree museum, gives Kurt like a really unique perspective on managing invasive plants. So he's going to bring that to bear today. He has a BS and an MS from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he studied plant biology and natural resources management. He was a founding steering committee member of the Northeast Illinois Invasive Plant Partnership, and he serves on the MIPN Board of Directors. He's been a director since 2012, and he's currently our treasurer. So we're happy to have him in that capacity, and we're very fortunate to have him presenting with us today. Keep an eye on the chat. I'm going to put some additional information in there, but now I'm going to turn things over to Kurt.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. It seems like this particular species has been kind of growing in people's awareness and interest in the recent years. So I'm happy to share what we've been dealing with here at Morton Arboretum and tell you our story. So again, welcome. And you can see this is the Emerging Midwest Invasive Seminar on Lesser celandine, otherwise called Ficaria verna. And thank you for that introduction, Michelle. So I'm going to just start off with an introduction to Morton Arboretum. So we're 1,700 acres of an outdoor woody tree museum located here in Northern Illinois. And these are just some of the images that we have from our site. So if you haven't been out here, come on out and check us out. I'm happy to show you around if you come on out. But at the heart of what we do is we're basically an outdoor tree museum. And so what we do is we collect trees and shrubs and other plants from around the world, and we display them outside in our collections. And so we have over 222,000 living plants in our collections. We arrange them in accessions and so we can keep it organized. But we have plants from all over the world. You can see 42 different countries are represented in our collections, and we have many threatened plants at some level, sometimes threatened in their home ranges. And so we go and collect those trees and bring them back into the Arboretum as a measure of ex situ conservation. But we also have 900 acres of our property devoted to in situ conservation, which is kind of in-house conservation. So we have lots of acreage of natural areas, oak woodlands, tallgrass prairie, wetlands, and such that are managed for conservation purposes as well. But today's focus is on lesser celandine, the Ficaria verna. So I'm going to talk about its identification, its distribution, the spread, impacts, and management. You can see some images of the plant in focus down there on the bottom of the screen as well. So just to kind of start off, this does go by a couple different names. So I want to point that out. So some of the common names are lesser celandine, as I've mentioned, but also one of the most popular other common names is fig buttercup. And scientific names, Ficaria verna, but it also goes by the name of Ranunculus ficaria as a synonym. I think more and more people are recognizing Ficaria verna as its name, so you probably see that more and more frequently. But Ficaria refers to the fig-like tuberous roots of the plant. You can see kind of on the bottom of the screen some of those roots that are down on the bottom of the images themselves. And then verna coming from of spring, referring to when the plant blooms. So, which is essentially right now, or we're getting into that window depending on where you are. The plant is in the Ranunculaceae, or otherwise the crowfoot or the buttercup family. So this is important, especially when we think about some of the lookalikes, which I'll get into in a second. If you're looking through the plant guides and the dichotomous keys, you might come across some subspecies of this plant, of the species, and you can find, from what I've considered, or what I've found is 5 different subspecies. So we can get into Ficaria verna, subspecies Ficaria, subspecies bulbifer, calthifolius, chrysocephala, and Ficariiformis. I'm not really going to get into the differences between these different subspecies. For our purposes today, we want to manage for all of them because they're all subspecies of this Ficaria verna. So, but essentially what they do is they differentiate between the foliage and how it's born on the plant, and then also how the tubers and the bulblets are actually born on the plant as well. So just getting into a little bit more about the plant's identification, you can see these bullet points here that I'll go through. Essentially, it's an ephemeral, so it comes and goes early in the spring, starting about right now. It's an herbaceous perennial with fibrous and tuberous roots, and depending on the conditions, it can get up to about 9 inches tall, but it's a fairly short stature plant, as most ephemerals are. The stems are essentially succulent, but sometimes they produce these little bulblets, which are an important component to focus on. You can see in the image on the bottom right there, you can see some of these bulblets that have formed kind of in the axils of the leaves rather. So you can see these little white bulblets that are a mode of dispersal, by the way. The leaves themselves are simple, meaning they're not further divided than what you can see here. Most of the time they are basal, so they come off the base of the plant, almost out of the ground, if you're looking at a plant that's growing out of the ground. And sometimes they're also cauline, or of the stem. So you can see an example of a cauline leaf right here. They all have petioles, so they're considered petiolate, and the blades themselves, the leaf blade, is ovate or even cordate, so oval shaped to almost heart-shaped, as you can see some of this in this image here. I really like using the drawings for describing the plant because I think it helps us to focus on the features of the plant rather than being distracted by the colorful flower or other features of the plant that might be more difficult. So this is really why I like looking at these drawings here. So getting into the flower, we can see that they're perfect flowers, meaning that they have both male and female parts. They are pedunculate, meaning they have a stem attaching to the rest of the plant. In this case, it's going almost all the way down to the bottom, which technically would be considered a scape. So if you're looking through the keys, you might see that term as well. But they have 3 to 4 sepals, 8 to 12 petals, brilliant yellow color, and then, of course, numerous filaments and pistils within the reproductive parts of the flower. The fruit is considered an achene, which is really a dry, indehiscent seed. It doesn't break open, in other words, unless it's germinating. But most of the time, these are actually considered abortives. They don't actually produce viable fruit. So that's an important component when managing this, because you might see some of the seeds, depending on which subspecies you have, the seeds are not really of interest to control necessarily because they might not actually be viable. But most of the time that's the case when these plants are producing these bulblets, as I've shown you down here below. So these bulblets, from what I understand, are a means of asexual reproduction. So these are essentially producing clones each and every time the generations go by. As I referenced, this plant is an ephemeral, so it blooms in the early spring. Here in northern Illinois, that would refer to about mid-April through mid to late May. So depending on where you are in the country, this could vary for you. At the moment, it's not even producing leaves. So right now we're still in that period where there's no snow and there's no foliage coming out of the ground at the moment, or very little, I should say. So it is one of the earliest plants to bloom every spring. For us, this species blooms during the mid-bloom for another species called skunk cabbage, if you're familiar with that one, or nearing the end of the dandelion's bloom. I'm sorry, the end of the Ficaria bloom is nearing the beginning of the dandelion's bloom. So if you're actually waiting for dandelions to begin blooming, you could be missing the window of treatment time for dealing with this particular species. So don't wait too long, in other words. So here are just a couple other images that I want to show you before we start digging into other aspects of the presentation. I've showed you on the left the drawing, which is a great drawing to show you the features. Here you can see sort of a painting. It looks a bit blurry. I apologize for that, but you can see some of these features as they look in color. And then as you look across to the right, you can see a couple of plants that I've pulled up and have shown here in the image on the right here. And note also you can see these tubers developing on the base of the plant. These would be down below the soil, of course. And then the leaves starting to emerge here. You can see a flower that's just emerging, and then another one, flower bud that's emerging here. And you can see some of the leaves coming off of the stem as well. Okay, so off the scape technically. Okay, so this plant has been growing. It's considered native to Europe, and it was introduced into the United States in 1867 into Pennsylvania. As you might imagine, this plant has been an ornamental, so it's produced in the industry. So it's introduced as an ornamental. It's still actually widely sold in the horticulture industry. You can look online and probably find sources to purchase it, which means that it's actually still spreading. So if people are buying this plant and planting it into their landscapes, then the dispersal mechanisms are still there, as well as natural means of its dispersal, which would increase its measure of spread as well. And I feel compelled to point out that as of yesterday, I double and triple checked our records, and we've never actually introduced it at the Morton Arboretum. So we still have it, and I'll explain what is going on in another minute. So when thinking about lookalikes, this is probably the biggest lookalike, at least for Northern Illinois. So Caltha palustris is another member of the Vernunculaceae, the same plant family that fig buttercup or lesser celandine is a part of. And so you can see in the image on the left, this is Caltha palustris, and the image on the right, you can see Ficaria verna. And you can see kind of like from the same sort of distance from the plant, what these plants look like. Okay, I'm going to get into one more slide here just to show you kind of from a distance again how these plants have been performing, at least at the Morton Arboretum. In the image on the right, you can see the Ficaria verna. It's forming this kind of carpet mat forming habit, almost to the exclusion of the rest of the ephemeral vegetation. You can see some of the shrubs kind of poking out of that, which is what we've seen as well on the property. But the mat forming characteristic is really indicative of how this plant behaves across the landscape. The Caltha palustris in the image on the left is more dispersed. The plant does not grow in such a solid mat forming carpet. And so for us, kind of at a distance, that's maybe an indicator, but it's not the only thing, of course, to be paying attention to. But this is just something to be aware of. Another yellow flower from a plant in the same plant family. So be careful about that. The Vernunculaceae is a rather large family, and there probably are other plants in other species in this family that are blooming at about the same time, depending on where you are. And so this is not really a comprehensive overview of lookalikes, but it is probably one of the more common species to be aware of. From my experience, the Caltha palustris grows, so they also grow in wetland environments. Okay, so the Caltha palustris doesn't seem to be growing in running water, so it grows in more marshy environments. Ficaria verna is highly, highly associated with streams or tributaries or flowing water. And I think it disperses readily through such means. So the hydrologic flow regime is actually an important consideration for us in our management at Morton Arboretum as well. So if we're going to look a little bit closer at these two species, I found this image online, actually from NRCS, and I think it does a nice job highlighting some of these features. So if you're going to be looking at these two different plants in the field, you'll note, I would say key in on the leaf, because the leaves, even though they may not be to scale here, they do show you the relative scale of each of the sizes. So on the image on the left, you can see the Calthopalestris, a much larger leaf, probably 3 or 4 times in area than the Ficaria verna. And you can see the margins are also distinctly different in both of these two different species. So in Calthopalestris, you can see that it's more of a fine-toothed edge. In the image on the right with the Ficaria, you can see that the plants are actually, they have wavy margins. Okay, so those are two features that I would use to help kind of discern the two different species. We're probably not going to be digging up the plants as we're staring at the images of the roots here, so those might not be really the best features to look at for field identification purposes. Our experience has been, just like in the couple images ago, that this particular species does grow in these mat-forming colonies, almost to the exclusion of every other herbaceous species that is in that area. So these two images are taken from our property or nearby in adjacent properties. And so you can see in the image on the left, there's a carpet forming. The plant is not in bloom yet, but this would be a perfect time to treat it, and treat it with an herbicide that would essentially kill off that entire mat. And I think that's actually what we are doing these days. In the image on the right, you can see that the plant is actually starting to bloom. So you can see a lot of the flower buds beginning to open. And that would also be a good point to control it as well. So I just want to highlight that we do our management in mid-April. And these, you know, if you wait too long, then you'll end up looking at either the seeds and dealing with seed dispersal, or you'll be dealing with the bulblet dispersal as well. And so if you wait too long in the treatment, then you'll end up facilitating another generation of dispersal there. So where's the plant found? You can see I've taken this image from EdMaps. This is kind of the current known distribution of Ficaria verna. In Illinois, where we're located, right there in northeastern Illinois, you can see we're kind of in the hot zone of Illinois for this particular species. But you can see it's in pretty scattered distribution across the country, more heavily distributed across the eastern US, and then of course in Washington and Oregon. I think it's important to point out that Ficaria verna is also noted to grow in these hardiness zones of 4 through 8. So what is a hardiness zone? This is essentially the average minimum temperature that a particular plant species can grow in. And so if we look at the color scheme on the right of zones 4 through 8, we can see kind of the purple through the yellow colors, and then look across to the image of the US, and you can see that these colors are actually comprised of most of the United States, so they fill in most of the country. Perhaps all I'm doing is suggesting that this plant has a higher degree or a higher capacity of its spread. So we should be looking out for this particular species at the moment. I'm not necessarily suggesting that this plant will take over the whole country, because this hardiness zone does have some variables that influence what can grow in these different areas. So microclimates, precipitation patterns that do vary in smaller scales. But this is kind of a general look, a generalized look that of the potential region where this plant can start to grow. So if we're going to dig in a little bit more to our site here at Morton Arboretum, you can see Morton Arboretum is outlined in this white solid line. And you can kind of see the surrounding zones of what's outside of our property. you can see some urban context and some residential areas as well. You can obviously see this yellow zone that I'm calling out to your attention. This is a subdivision just to our north, and it's called Glen Ellen Woods, but this is actually the source of what we think is the population that has been spreading into and even beyond the Morton Arboretum. I want to point out this one blue tributary that's kind of in the center of this yellow region that I've called out, because that's one of the drainage patterns that is actually in that neighborhood. But if we look at, oops, actually, I think I have it in another slide here. So what I'm doing is, in this image, I'm showing you the herbarium specimens that have been recorded, that have been recording our population in northeastern Illinois. So at Morton Arboretum, we do collect voucher specimens of the naturalizing flora of the region and other parts of the country, but I'm just calling out some of the voucher specimens from this particular region. So Lesser celandine has been found and documented in our region since the early 1980s. But you'll note that it's primarily in Cook County until about 1995, when it's found in DuPage County. DuPage County is where the Morton Arboretum is. But then you can see another DuPage County in 2003, and another DuPage County report. But it wasn't actually documented in closer proximity to the Morton Arboretum until 2007. And this is referring also to the subdivision just to the north, like I pointed out a minute ago. In 2012 is when it was first documented in the Morton Arboretum. Okay, so this is going to give you a better sense of what's happening to the population across the region of northern Illinois. So here is one particular herbarium voucher from 2012. This is the one that I referenced in the previous slide. In a voucher specimen, it does produce we do produce these labels that give a better sense of what is happening at that particular population. So I've just kind of taken that image and I've zoomed in on that to read what it says. So we can see here in the description that the site of Glen Ellen Woods is where this particular plant was taken, and it was introduced along a creek base of property from elsewhere in the Chicago region in the early 1990s. It may have come from Cook County, but it's not really clear on where this came from based on this description. But it does also go on to say that it spread from the original introduction site to nearby lawns within that subdivision, I should add. And it seems to be very prolific and acts like a garden escape or an introduced weed. So this is a report from 2007. And so again, this is the population where the voucher specimen was taken from back then in 2007. So if we look at the region a little differently, I'm not showing you the aerial photograph, I'm showing you now the contours, the topographic map here. And so here we still have this yellow region called out, and I still have that tributary highlighted here as well. And you can get a better sense of the topographic relief in this particular region. Obviously, the closer these topographic contours are, the steeper the terrain. So we're essentially moving from uphill to downhill as we go from this neighborhood here across to another neighborhood just down slope. And so this is all these streets you can see lined up along this one particular neighborhood. What is essentially happening is that the population is spreading from this particular creek down into this neighborhood. And so the population's been dispersing down ultimately to the DuPage River, which is this blue line in the kind of central rib of the Morton Arboretum. So I show you that. Yeah, and so as I mentioned here, I've called out another section here with this yellow line kind of indicating where we've actually seen the population spreading throughout that particular neighborhood. So this is kind of like our high-tech version of tracking the population. Okay, so now we're in the neighborhood. We're in the high elevation in the original neighborhood. So you can see in the image that the street, you can get a sense of the contours here in the particular neighborhood. We're at the higher elevation. There are more ravines in this neighborhood, more ditches alongside the roads, for example. And the ravines in this particular case seem to confine the population. So this has been what's happening in this particular region here. Note that these are not fig buttercup plants here down on the edges of the road. These are actually dandelions. But this is, where we've been finding them. So I've shown you these couple images, and I've shown you these images from the neighborhood, I should add, that are actually colonizing along these particular ravines. So you can see the green masses with the yellow flowers. These are all fig buttercup or ranunculus, Ficaria verna. Sorry, I'm getting my names even mixed up here today. So as we move downslope, we're going from the original neighborhood down to kind of the other neighborhood I referenced. We can see that the population starts to spread out. So as the flood waters kind of race down slope through these ravines, they've perhaps come up onto the kind of more upland environments out of the channels. And so then we get the population dispersal is happening on a kind of a wider scale. So it's not as confined to the streams in this particular case. And so we get population, as you can see, of fig buttercup in the arrow on the top. And then we can see smaller individuals more scattered in the kind of the arrow on the bottom. But we also see that there are other kind of weedy plants growing in the same vicinity, like the dandelion. So if we get a close-up look at what's happening in this residential environment, we can see that the dandelions and the fig buttercup, as well as creeping Charlie and other kind of typical lawn weeds, they're all kind of growing together. And so these images are close-up images from the neighborhood. So you can see all these plants growing together along with turf grass. And so we've seen that some of these residences have actually left their lawns to grow and to just, they've sort of enabled the weeds and dandelions to grow, but they're also at the same time, they've been allowing the fig buttercup to grow as well. And in the image on the right, you can see some of the homeowners, as shown here, have treated with some sort of broadleaf herbicide. So this could be a 2,4-D product, or it could be some other broadleaf herbicide. We have not been able to confirm that because we were unable to get a hold of the homeowners. But you can see kind of the yellowing and the curling of the basal leaves of the fig buttercup throughout this image here. What we also noted is that by 2012, the population was not just coming down from one neighborhood to the next, as I have been sharing, but it's also found its way into this other stream channel, which meant that it was entering into the Arboretum more directly. And so we did start to see a population coming in here and starting to kind of drain and flow down slope, ultimately down to a pond right here, and then making it potentially could make its way to the DuPage River, the channel itself. So it was about that time when we noted the population, and that's when we began treatment. So we began treatment along what we call the night exit, which is just referencing this region here. It's a night exit out of the Arboretum. But the heaviest concentration was really along this shared property. So at the property line and within the first couple 100 yards, I would say, this solid mat forming habit was actually quite prominent. But if you continued walking down the slope here, walking down the stream, moving down in elevation, down towards this pond, the population became more diffuse and more sparse, more space in between individual plants. So as time would have gone on, then you could imagine that the population would continue colonizing all the way down here, making its way to the DuPage River channel itself. So basically what we've done is scoured the length of this drainage, and we've been treating it. We've been essentially spraying it with herbicide. And so we've continued moving from uphill to downhill in our treatment as we follow the path of water. And we found ultimately fewer and fewer individuals throughout the lower reaches of our property. down to the channel itself. So we've found ultimately relatively few individuals over time there. The highest concentration, again, kind of up closer to where the neighborhood boundaries were. However, the story gets more complex. We found it in another watershed. Here at the Arboretum, we found it kind of coming in from the west. I'm sorry, from the east. And so this has been another issue that's left us scratching our heads, because we've been able to walk this even outside of the Arboretum and kind of look at what has been happening and try to determine how to manage this particular population of fig buttercup that we're dealing with. So if we're thinking about managing this, well, here, just a quick discussion about the management history here. So again, in 2012, we began to manage the population. Again, the highest concentration was found along the shared property boundary, and then becoming more widely dispersed, moving down slope. After the first year of treatment, this is really promising. The first year of treatment, we saw the population go from a continuous carpet of fig buttercup and lesser celandine to more scattered individuals throughout the same area. And I'm going to point out this picture in the top right hand portion of the screen. We can see that in the foreground, there's very little growing on the ground. We can see a fence growing kind of in the middle of the image. And then beyond the fence, you can see this mat forming of lesser celandine. And you can even see the yellow flowers growing there as well. And then, of course, the home there. But you can see that it's been largely, the population has largely been confined to this ravine system and kind of up onto the floodplain, if you will. So wherever the water has potential to go is where we've found it here and on our property and on adjacent property as well. But this is the picture that we took just after one season of treating. So in other words, if I had taken a beforehand image, you would see this population from the other side of the fence continuing into the Arboretum, into what you see as the foreground image here on the right. So just after one season, our effort made a big difference. But of course, you can't stop there, because you have to continue watching for the individuals. Otherwise, you know, the population will just rebound and reestablish itself. So we have seen persistent populations in the Arboretum. We've seen new infestations sort of appearing in different areas, even as I referenced in the last few slides. So being persistent in our control is really important, and spending the time to look far and wide for those individual plants that aren't tied to kind of that carpet formation is really important. So we've really spent a considerable amount of time looking for that to help stamp out this infestation. I should also add that we've been working with the local property owners to help inform them of what we've been doing on the property, and then informing them to, or asking them to do the same. And so we've seen some neighbors that have actually taken this up and have been controlling the plant on their properties, but not everybody has. And so that, you know, just adds to the complexities of what we're dealing with. So in a perfect world, it'd be great if every property owner was controlling this, but we have not gotten to that level yet. So some of us on the line might be interested in what we're actually spraying. And so we've dialed in our herbicide treatment as almost exclusive control measure. So hand pulling it is really ineffective when dealing with such a large population. So we've been spraying it with glyphosate. 2 to 3% is recommended. We found it to be quite successful. Of course, these are often found in aquatic areas, so we do have to treat it with aquatic rated formulations of glyphosate. And then we've also added an aquatic surfactant as well. So something that's able to be treated or to be used in these areas is important. And then we're continuing to engage the community groups in these in this control effort. Adding to the complexity, and I think I just have a couple slides left, we do have these individuals popping up here. So you can see in the image on the right, you can see this one fig buttercup or lesser celandine just kind of hanging out here at the base of one of our planted trees, kind of in a random upland spot within the Arboretum. And so this is, again, leaving us scratching our heads, trying to understand how it got to places like this. So it doesn't seem to be tied to flowing water, but perhaps there's other vectors at play here. This is essentially what it looks like when we're treating. We start from uphill and we move downhill. With the flow of water, we line up with our team and everybody has the glyphosate solution, and we're looking for those individual lesser celandine plants scattered throughout the rest of the vegetation here. And then in the image on the bottom, you can see we just kind of scour these stream banks and scour all the way down slope along our entire property. So after all this, lessons that we've learned would be to act early and act often, because this population can move quickly. Propagules can be dispersed far downstream, so checking all the way downstream is important. And acting often is also necessary. So what we do is we've treated kind of an initial round in mid-April when the plant's up far enough to absorb the herbicide. And then we go back a couple of weeks later and look for those individuals, which is actually a more challenging effort because the rest of the vegetation is oftentimes taller, making it more difficult to find the individual plants that we're looking for. I would recommend thinking and working on a watershed scale. So working with your neighbors is important, working upstream and downstream. And then follow the water, as I've been talking about as well. Timing, get in early to treat. So mid to early April is probably a good time. The longer you wait in going into early May in Northern Illinois, you're going to be left dealing with some taller other vegetation surrounding the fig buttercups or the lesser celandine. And then again, 2 to 3% glyphosate solution seems to work well. We have tried dialing it up a little bit to a 5% solution, but we've seen that it kind of burns off the foliage, and then the roots will resprout sometimes. So not too high of a concentration. Give it time to treat early to absorb into the plant, and then kill off the entire plant. And that is where I'll leave it for today. Michelle, I'll turn it over to you. I don't know if we have any questions or if we have any time for questions.
We did get some great questions, but I think we are running really short on time. So let's see what we can do here. I also I've put it in the chat a couple times, but in case anyone's not following the chat, really appreciate Kurt making the time to do this today. And the events like this that MIPN does, at least in this case, are not grant supported. So any donation that you're able to make to support these kind of outreach efforts and education efforts are really appreciated. We accept donations as small as $5. So every little bit helps. There's a link in the chat if that's something you're able to do today. And yes, we are recording the presentation. I just saw that pop up in the chat. Let's see. There was a couple questions about spread and management. Do you know if this plant responds to fire, Kurt?
So no, I don't, because the areas that we were finding it, we don't usually use burn management. So I don't have any experience with fire.
Okay.
I suspect that the mat forming nature of a population might actually help suppress the fire as it moves through an area. It may help to control more outlying populations, I suspect, as you find individuals spread amongst like combustible fuels. But if everything's green and lush at the time of, it may not actually carry fire all that well either. So these are just kind of my suspicions at the moment.
And we saw some pictures that were more upland where you had, we saw dandelions and things like that. So is it always found near water, or do you find it in upland locations as well?
I would say 99% of our population has been tied to those channels and like the adjacent stream banks. But we have found odd, very small populations more upland that don't seem to be tied to water dispersal. So it's kind of a mystery. Maybe there's some other wildlife dispersal mechanism at play here that I'm just not aware of.
Okay. And other than waterways, is there any other concerns for seed spread? There was a question if, Like if you're taking your dog for a walk, is that something that could contribute to spread?
Well, I suspect that if you're walking through a colony of it and, plant material becomes lodged onto your shoes, mud embedded in the soles of your feet, for example, or your shoes, then I think that could be a dispersal mechanism as well.
Okay. And do you know how long the seed bank persists?
I don't.
Okay.
We've seen very effective control in just a short period of time. So, that indicates to me a relatively short seed bank time, but we've not done any sort of experimenting on that.
Okay. Couple other questions. I've been jumping around a little bit, so my apologies, everyone. I do believe that we know it outcompetes with native ephemerals. Have you seen that happen at Morton, or have any other experiences with that?
Actually, some of these areas have, as in the image that I've shown, they have very little other vegetation aside from some of the weedier vegetation. Anecdotally, I've heard other managers have actually seen transition of Mertensia in the understory to almost exclusively Ficaria.
Okay.
So it has been reported elsewhere, but at Morton Arboretum, we haven't seen that sort of thing happening at the moment because of where it's growing. So some of these stream channels are highly degraded, and so they don't have a tremendous population of native vegetation to begin with. So we haven't, well, in a sense, fortunately, we haven't seen that transition.
Okay. And I'm just going to, we'll just do two more because I want to respect everyone's time here today. Are you doing any restoration work? Are you doing any native plant replacement in these areas of management?
So we are actually in the DuPage River corridor. This is kind of farther down slope within the central sort of spine or the central region of the Arboretum. We've done a pretty extensive river restoration project. We actually partnered up with the Army Corps of Engineers to do that. So we've already removed lots of this population and then also replanted. So we're still keeping an eye out for these little populations that try to reappear.
Okay. And I'll just, I put this in the chat, but just to follow up, if you do see new populations of this popping up, you can report that to either edmaps.org or if you're in Michigan, I know a lot of times people use MISN, misn.msu.edu. So those are two good databases where you can report your sightings if you come across this in a natural area. Okay, I think that's all we're going to have time for today. I really appreciate everyone being here today, making the time for this. There's a link in the chat, or you can go to the MIPIN's website and sign up for our next webinar. We've got two coming up, one on myla minute-weed, and we have one that's a combination teasel and poison hemlock. So we've got great speakers lined up. So make sure you sign up and join us for the next one. And yep, we'll see everybody then.